George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation. We're pleased to be joined by Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh. This is the first of a series of conversations about the state of the city. And first of all, Mayor, thank you for joining us. And let's begin by talking about COVID, right? And how the city is looking to reopen. What are the plans? I've been vaccinated. I'm like, by the time people hear this, I'm fully vaccinated. Yay. And so we've been moving around, still being careful. I'm still wearing masks. I'm still social distancing. I'm still washing. I did do a little traveling. I will say that I did do a little traveling, but even though I did that, I still did it safely. So let's talk about COVID and what COVID means for the city.
Sure. Well, congrats on the upcoming second shot, George. I too am scheduled to get mine this week, so we'll both be fully vaccinated when your audience sees and hears us, which is great. And that's the almost the sole focus now, is making sure we get everyone in the city vaccinated. I updated last week at my monthly briefing that the county rate was about 33% of the county population had at least one shot. The city was at 23%. Not surprising, given the many barriers that many of our city residents have. We have a number of what would be considered harder to reach populations, but that's why I've been pushing so hard on the county and the state, who have been great partners, to do more pop-up vaccines. We know when we bring the vaccine to the people, or to at least closer to the people, the places where they're comfortable, that helps. So we're going to continue to do those. We've had success with those. So really focused right now on vaccine rollout. Eligibility is fully open now. Supply is in a really good place. So now we just have to get shots in arms. So that's what we're working on. City government is no different. We're reopening in different ways. Actually, City Hall itself will be officially reopened to the public sometime next month, after being closed for over a year now. So things are starting to get back to normal, but we're not out of the woods yet. As you said, we all need to continue to be safe and cautious, practice all the necessary precautions so we don't have one last slip up here. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you're starting to see it and feel it in the community, and it feels good.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I want to say something about those pop-up clinics, because that's actually how I got my first and my second vaccination. So
Great.
that was a good thing, and it was convenient. And it's funny because I didn't hear, someone texted me and said, there's a pop-up clinic over here. I was like, okay. And I called and I got it done. And then actually three members of our household did that. And it was
Great.
very, the staff there was very nice, and I didn't feel a thing. So if you're worried about, I don't know how your first one
That was great.
And I'll say to people, a lot of people are concerned about how they are going to react to the second shot. I will tell you that I did not have any real reaction to it. Not actually a little bit more for the first one, but not really for the second one. Everybody's different. But as the CDC will tell you, or most physicians will tell you, if you have a reaction and feel some kind of way about it, it's because the vaccine is working.
That's right.
So don't feel, oh, I got the vaccine and I got sick. And so that certainly do. All right. Let's talk about one of the other items in the news is Skyline Apartments, and there was a murder there, two murders actually. And I know, what can the city do? In that, I know that the city has taken some steps to hold the Green Group accountable to the conditions that of that apartment complex. But in reality, what can the city do when a private developer has multiple properties? We read in this week that there's another property in town that doesn't even have mailboxes that they own. So what can the city really do beyond codes enforcement to bring properties into compliance if they're a private developer?
Yeah, well, we're doing a lot, but the reality is, George, as long as those conditions are in place, whether it's at the Skyline or numerous other properties in the city, we're not doing enough. We need to do more. So, the Skyline in particular has been on our radar for at least 3 years. We have a data-driven process where we look at properties that have where we see a lot of police calls combined with code enforcement violations, fire calls, EMS calls. And when again, going back about 3 years ago, we started to see the skyline move up that list. So we knew something not right was happening there. So we have brought all of our resources and authority to bear from the city on the property. We've cited it hundreds of times. We've responded to hundreds of police calls. It's hard because, as you pointed out, it is privately owned, and short of actually, taking the property through eminent domain or something, which, trust me, I've even thought about that. But the reality is there are a lot of properties in the city that are not where they need to be. And so we need to continue to push hard and hold them accountable. We did take some additional actions after Ms. Turi's tragic murder, including declaring the public areas in the property unfit for human occupation, given the unsanitary conditions, as well as the fact that the elevators don't consistently work. We issued them a nuisance abatement notice, which gives us some additional teeth to do things like we're not able to officially take the property away from them, but we can take the management responsibilities away from them and put it in the hands of a manager who's up to the job. So those are all things that we are working on, that we've been working on. But again, until every tenant in that property and every other one feels like they are in a safe, healthy environment, there's more to do. So we're not letting up. It's infuriating to me, and as I mentioned the other day, it's hand-to-hand combat. We go at them on one issue, they address that, another issue comes up. So you multiply that times the many other challenging properties in the city. It's a lot, but we are laser focused on it and aren't going to let up.
Yeah, I know that the chief during his press conference has, I guess the DA expressed frustration that the perpetrator in this particular case was released, and felt like this was part of reform. Is it fair to bring that into the conversation?
Well, I think in situations like this, you always have to take a hard look in the mirror and at the circumstances that led to it. Now, I think that the topic of bail reform has become so hyper politicized. It's hard to have an honest conversation about it. Listen, I think every reasonable person can agree that the amount of money you have should not influence whether or not you are able to be free from incarceration. That's just wrong. But for a long time, that's what we did. So that's the right approach and the right outcome of our bail reform efforts. I think where we need to look harder is at the specific offenses that allow for someone to be housed in jail versus just issued an appearance ticket, as well as where judges have discretion. In this particular case, there was some discretion. I'm not going to second guess the courts, but yeah, I think we need to look at it. There are certain examples where there are some crimes where if you looked at them, you might think, well, that might be one where we need to keep people out of the community, at least for a little while. But so yes, it's fair, but let's not confuse that with the fact that your income should have no influence on your freedom.
Let's staying with law enforcement, if you will. Where do we stand in regard to policing? I know that at the end of 2020, and the governor required municipalities to present a reform plan to the governor. So what is your plan on this, or where does this plan stand? You talked about making positive improvements. What has happened? Where do we stand? What's the latest? What's not happening?
Right. So the Common Council unanimously approved the reform plan that was required by the state. We've since submitted that, so we're in compliance with the governor's executive order. The plan itself reflected in large part the efforts that we've been undertaking now for the past few years, many of which are contained within my executive order that I issued back in June of 2020. So it's a continuation of those efforts. A lot of the work leading up to that executive order that had been done, whether it was the new policies that we published, from use of force to body-worn camera, to moving our Office of Professional Standards out of the PSB and proximate to the to the Citizens Review Board, where people would feel safer filing complaints. Those are all things that were already underway. Since my executive order and the governor's executive order, probably the most significant update is the right to know legislation, which was included both in my executive order and in Common Council legislation, is fully being implemented right now by the SPD as of April 1st. So that's a big step forward. I was out with some officers doing a neighborhood walk yesterday, and I saw one pull out his business card and hand it to a constituent. So that's good. That's working. There's a lot more that still needs to be done. I still want to get more officers living in the city of Syracuse. We tried to negotiate that in our contract with the PBA, which is now headed to arbitration, but we're still looking for ways in which we can do that. I think that there's a lot more we want to do on the concept of co-response, of identifying what are the calls that SPD is responding to now, where maybe law enforcement isn't the most appropriate initial responder, or at least not alone, and coupling that with some of our human service partner agencies, engaging with people that may have mental health or substance abuse issues that a different skill set is required for. So those are a couple areas, the co-response and residency that are still need to be done, but we're proud of what we've accomplished so far.
Quick aside, when I think of the mental health aspect, I drive through the city and you see a number of people either at some of the stops, the traffic on-ramps, if you will, or you see people, shadow boxing in the street, and certainly they have a right to do that. When I mean shadow boxing, you know what I mean, that the people,
I know what you mean.
There's people in the street, and so, and you see that, and you're like, well, what can a city do? People have a right to be outside. The weather is getting warmer, and I don't know what a city can do. And so maybe you have some insight into what.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, that's part of the process. We have done a few things. So those individuals that you see out in the street, they may have any number of issues. They may be homeless, and in that case, that's why we engaged with In My Father's Kitchen and initiated the Higher Ground program, where we're doing proactive street outreach to people that are homeless, to identify, to help get them housed, to help get them some work, at least to get on their feet. But what we learned through that process is a lot of the individuals that program was engaging with had other issues that organization wasn't necessarily equipped to deal with, like mental health and substance abuse. So we recently, through some funding that we secured in the CARES Act, we have engaged Liberty Resources that is doing some street outreach in response to people specifically with mental health and substance abuse issues, because you have a different toolkit and different resources to provide those people. So those are two areas where we are trying to be more proactive in engaging with those individuals. To your point, in public spaces, public property, everyone's entitled to be there, but clearly some people that you see in those situations are struggling, and we need to make sure that they at least have the option to get the help that they need if they choose to do that. So it's an ongoing process, but we are trying new things.
Let's talk about some money, and there's a lot here in this part of the conversation, so bear with me. So there is obviously a massive infrastructure bill that Congress is considering. What are you doing to encourage the passage of that?
Well, so there's a number of different factors. We were thrilled to see the American Recovery Plan approved, and I advocated aggressively for that with our federal delegation and with the president, and with that, we get significant relief, which we desperately needed given the impact that COVID has had on our city revenues. And so that has allowed us to take a step back and to look holistically at, again, how we both address the immediate issues to ensure that we're still able to deliver services to our residents, but also to look big picture. What are those persistent challenges that we face as a community, and what are some strategic investments we can make to move the needle? A number of those are infrastructure related. So if we know that an infrastructure bill is on its way, that will help us to prioritize the resources that we have available now. We might choose not to put them into infrastructure if we know that that funding is coming behind. But a lot of this, well, there's a lot of discussion about how much money the federal government is spending right now. But the reality is there are so many unmet needs that have gone unmet for decades, and infrastructure is among the most prominent examples, where we're not just making up for the past couple of years, we're making up for the past few decades. And so I'm going to continue to advocate aggressively with our delegation and with the president to get the infrastructure resources we need.
Does that mean working with other mayors across the country as well?
Absolutely. I'm on the executive committee of the New York Conference of Mayors, and we do collective outreach and advocacy. We write letters, and we've been doing that initially with the ARP, and now we'll be doing the same thing with infrastructure.
You said that if the infrastructure happens, then you would channel the money that you are going to use the Rescue Act money for that came through municipalities with this last stimulus package. So what are the infrastructure needs? What if it doesn't happen? What would you then, if the bill doesn't happen and you have to use the money that you received on this round, what would the impact be?
I've already spent that 126 million 10 times over in my head. There's a lot of need out there, but that's a part of the process that we're going through now. And I joke about it being up to me, but I represent the people, and so we want to engage the community. We want to engage the Common Council, who's going to have ultimate authority over the expenditure of that money, to make sure that the plan is reflective of our collective priorities. But just a quick recap of our approach of how we spend those funds. Number one is making our workforce whole. Our workforce took on a lot of the burden over the past year from the pandemic in the form of furloughs and other concessions that we want to reward them for and make them whole as part of that process. Next, in the order of priorities is, again, getting city finances whole. We've lost significant, tens of millions of dollars of revenue. So we need to make sure our fund balance is where we need it to be, and our budget is able to be balanced. And that's going to, that again is going to be tens of millions of dollars. After that, again, it's looking at what are those strategic one-time investments. We're certainly going to look at, city capital and equipment and things like that, but we are going to look at infrastructure, things like our pedestrian infrastructure, our sidewalks, doing more roads, looking at public transportation. How can we enhance our public transportation options? Our water infrastructure, critically important. Also, non-traditional infrastructure, digital infrastructure. We know now more than ever the importance of internet connectivity. So how can we make strategic investments in broadband and Wi-Fi that can ensure that everyone in the city has affordable access to the internet? So those are just a few examples of the types of infrastructure investments we make, and that doesn't even get into some of the other neighborhood issues like housing, and we're looking at those areas as well.
So are there shovel-ready projects? Let's say the infrastructure bill does come through. Do you have what's a shovel-ready project that you could identify that would take advantage of, whether it's the money that you just earmarked, the 126 million, or if there were any new infrastructure money that would come through?
Yeah, there's a number of projects that we already have in the pipeline where we have resources secured to do, like let's say a road reconstruction or a mill and pave. But we know that the most effective and efficient way to use those resources for redoing a road is if we can also go underneath that road and fix the water lines and the sewer lines. So we're all doing it at the same time, so we don't have to go back in there and cut a year after we do it, which sadly we have to do far too much. So we have a number of projects, road projects that are in the pipeline where we have the road funding, but we don't have the funding for what's underneath. An example being, we've got federal funds to repave in the next couple, I think in 2 years, West Genesee Street, basically from downtown all the way to the city line. Ideally, we'd like to, which we would consider shovel ready, but ideally we'd like to get some of those resources underneath the road to do that right. We have a water infrastructure. We've been talking for years about extending our intake line, and we have 2 intake lines that pull water out of Skaneateles Lake. But our longer one, we want to make longer and go deeper into the lake to further protect us from any issues associated with algae blooms or other impacts from climate change and invasive species. So those are just two examples. There's a lot more that we would consider, if not shovel ready, near shovel ready, with that we can move on quickly with the resources.
So the state budget has now passed. What does that mean for the city?
We're still trying to figure that out. We're looking to, we're trying to unpack it. It looks to be good for education and for the Syracuse City School District, which is a critical need and a priority for us. It looks to hold state aid to municipalities constant, steady. So that's helpful. That was, we had some withholdings over the past year that really hurt our revenue. It's our second largest source of revenue, and so to be able to keep that at the current level is helpful. But there's a lot more in there that we're still unpacking. But it appears to be a good budget and good for the city of Syracuse.
Speaking of infrastructure, I drove down Salina Street the other day, and there was some construction for most of the winter, but Mayor, South Salina Street, come on.
What, George, we're done. What's the problem? No. So that's actually a good example, and it's probably on us. We probably should have put up some big signs or something to tell people that we're not done.
Okay.
So that's a perfect example where we had a federally funded mill and pave project to get all of Salina and State Street done from MLK Boulevard all the way to the north side to where State and Salina converge. We were able to move some resources around to get some water line replacement done before we finished the road. So what you see, the work you saw there was us doing the water lines last construction season, and then they basically just patched it up to the terrible condition that it is in now until we come back through this year. So this year we're going to come back through and we're going to do all of Salina and all of State from MLK through downtown onto the north side. That'll be done. So sorry, you didn't get the memo on that.
Yeah, I was just driving through, and this is not related, and you may not have any impact. What about the marquee for the landmark? I know that arts have certainly taken a tremendous hit, but any progress there?
Yeah, so that's one of those really frustrating things that the funding for the marquee has been secured. It was secured a couple of years ago, in large part because of the support of Assemblyman Magnarelli in New York State. But the states, for understandable reasons, over the past year, stopped. They they froze all of those grant awards. So the landmark has been waiting for the state to release those funds so they can do that marquee. So we're hoping that will come at some point this year. We'll be able to get back on track with that project. But the funding's secured. We're going to get a new marquee on the landmark. It's really gonna shine and lift up that whole section of Salina Street. But your point about arts and culture, that's another area where when we're looking at how we're going to prioritize our federal funds, our arts and cultural institutions are so important, not just to the overall diversity and health of our community, but also to our economy. And so we're going to look at ways to support that industry as well.
You mentioned earlier about housing, Mayor, and obviously it's sort of the best of times and worst of times, right? We see luxury housing construction in the city, and that's a good sign, I guess. But at the same time, you are also trying to build up the housing stock and make housing affordable for so many more people. So how do you balance the two?
Yeah, well, I think that we need to make sure now more than ever, as we've seen that kind of what I would call the market rate apartment development really fire on all cylinders. Now we need to make sure at a minimum, anytime we're investing public dollars, whether it's through the Industrial Development Agency or state grants, that we're making sure that we're building projects that are for everyone. So a perfect example, I'm looking out my window right now at the old Smith Restaurant Supply building. That's being redeveloped right now. It went through SIDA, and SIDA was able to incentivize them to incorporate some lower income, more affordable housing units. So we have mixed income in that project. That's what we are prioritizing going forward for any public investments. But we're also looking at diversifying the overall housing stock. We need to build new single family homes in the city. we have reduced the overall number of vacant properties, but we still have a lot of gap-toothed blocks in the city. So that's why through my Resurgent Neighborhoods initiative, we are building 50 new single-family owner-occupied homes. We have funding secured for 31 of them, and we'll probably build about 15 this year. We'll do the rest of them next year, and I'm hoping with the federal funds, we'll be able to fully fund, get all of those 50 built. And then we also are looking at building a number of two-family units. So 200 units total of new affordable housing that's income restricted, but giving people, accessible opportunities to own their homes or to rent their homes in the city of Syracuse. And in doing so, really start to stabilize some of these transitional blocks and strengthen neighborhoods and strengthen communities. So housing is a big priority.
Lastly, we'll figure out what we can get in the time we have left, which I'm sure we're over time. But 81, I was this is 20 years now. We've been talking about 81. And I know that this is not your decision, but where do we stand with 81? Because it's going to have a tremendous impact. You talk about infrastructure, tremendous impact on the community. Where do we stand as of today?
Well, it has taken far too long, but I do think we're close for a couple of reasons. One, Governor Cuomo announced that it's his intention to start construction on 81 in 2022. That's the first time we've had a flag planted to say, okay, that's what we're working towards. The state still have to get through their environmental review process. So we expect them to release their draft environmental impact statement, their most up-to-date draft environmental impact statement this summer. Then we'll have some public hearings associated with that. Then it will go back, and then they will have to release a final environmental impact statement and a record of decision. The reason I think that the rest of the process is going to move along a lot faster than it has to date is, number one, we've got some new resources being directed towards infrastructure, but we also have a new administration in Washington. The Biden administration is very much aligned with certainly with my perspective on 81 and many others in the community, that we recognize that not just with 81, with so many other federal infrastructure investments in the past have hurt communities and disproportionately hurt communities of color. And we have an opportunity in 81 to try to undo some of that damage. And so I think between President Biden, Secretary Buttigieg, and the rest of the administration, they see the value in the community grid option to get through traffic going around the city, to get local traffic onto local streets, and to start to rebuild the neighborhoods that highway tore up, and to do it in an inclusive, accessible way where people that are living within the shadow of the viaduct now actually stand to benefit from it. Not just don't get hurt from it, benefit from it. We all need to be focused on that.
What will the final plan be?
Well, to be determined, but I think it's likely at this point, given the fact that the community grid has been identified as the preferred alternative, to be something close to the community grid plan we've seen. There's still some issues with that design that we need to address, especially around MLK School down on the south side, where we want to make sure that we're addressing some of the concerns we've heard from the community. But I think it will be largely that. So again, through traffic with some enhancements to some of the highway infrastructure on 41, we'll again go around the city. We'll do some enhancements to our local street grid, and we'll all be better off for it. It's the best transportation option, but it's also the best option for the city and the region.
New developments through the Syracuse Surge. What's the latest there?
Yeah, lots going on with Surge. We're hoping to get the STEAM school off the ground this year. We do have state funding secured for that. We finally got approval from the Common Council on the Tech Garden expansion, so that's happening. Our smart streetlight network is up and running, and we're now going to start leveraging that network to do things like have public Wi-Fi at all of our community centers. Have sensors throughout the city that are going to measure all sorts of different things, from air quality to road conditions. So there's a lot happening there, and all the while, again, making sure that we're connecting people in the city to the opportunities that we're creating here. It's not just about economic development for the sake of economic development. It's being intentional about it to make sure that unemployed and underemployed people, residents of the city of Syracuse, are being given the tools and the resources they need to actually benefit from these jobs, from these opportunities.
How safe is the city right now?
Well, overall crime is down. It's been down over the past 3 years, but violent crime specifically has gone up. And of course, that's what I think most influences our feeling of safety. The reality is we still are a very safe city, but we also see far too much violent crime, whether it's in the form of gun crime or otherwise. And unfortunately, certain blocks and certain neighborhoods are safer than others, and that's inherently not equitable. So it's a challenge. It's one that Chief Buckner and I and our other partners are working very hard on. But across the country, cities are seeing increases in violent crime. We're trying to figure out how much of that is related to the pandemic, to the mental health issues that have come from it. So we're not unique in those problems, but I want to be unique in the solutions to them.
Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh, thank you so much. I'll give you this. I'll leave you with this. Someone had a choice between moving to Austin and choosing Syracuse, and they chose Syracuse. So I don't know what that says, but there is something to that. Just I'll leave you with that.
I'll take it. Thank you, George.
Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Absolutely.